The hijacker cracked the door, demanded the mechanics prove they were real, then pressed a knife into a flight attendant's ribs so everyone could hear her breathing. At 1:26 p.m. on May 14, 2021, at Washington Dulles in Virginia, an FBI HRT team in oil-stained coveralls rolled a tug and tool cart toward a hijacked jet, close enough to smell jet fuel and blood, betting the disguise would buy them 5 seconds. I'm James. Stay with me, because this wasn't a storm the plane story until the very last hour. Before that, it was a quiet case about cash, fake badges, and one man who trained his people to walk like they belonged on the ramp. The jet sat alone on a remote hardstand, nose angled away from the terminal like the airport was ashamed of it. Emergency vehicles stayed back on purpose. Too much movement would make the cabin panic, and panic was what the hijackers wanted. Through the oval windows, you could see passengers packed tight, hands up, eyes fixed forward, trying not to attract attention. A man near row 12 had a soaked sleeve, dark red, spreading. A flight attendant pressed napkins into the wound with shaking hands, whispering something to keep him conscious. The cabin air looked thick, like everyone was holding their breath at once. Supervisory Special Agent Erin Caldwell stood behind the maintenance truck's open door with a hard hat in her hand. Under the reflective vest was armor. Her face stayed calm, but her jaw kept tightening every time the injured man sagged. Special Agent Nate Klein, dressed like a ramp mechanic, flexed his gloved fingers around a tool bag handle. Not fidgeting, testing grip. He didn't look at the plane. He looked at the line to the door and the way the wind carried sound. The negotiator's voice came through the radio, low and steady. "Send the injured passenger out." A reply floated from the doorway, calm and accented. "Come closer and I make it worse." That was the corner. They couldn't wait him out, and they couldn't rush. A direct assault would turn knives into a scoreboard. And the worst part was the engines. The hijackers kept hinting they could restart and move the aircraft again. If that jet began to roll, every option got smaller, faster. Caldwell gave one small nod. The maintenance convoy started forward, boring on purpose. A tug, a cart of cables, a fire bottle. The kind of equipment you'd see on any Tuesday, which was the only reason it could get within meters of a hijacked aircraft, without triggering immediate killing. The forward door opened a few inches. A face appeared. The knife stayed just inside the frame, blade angled inward like it was resting against someone's ribs. "Fix it," the man said. "Now." Caldwell lifted a clipboard with a work order clipped to it. "We need to check the panel," she said, voice flat, annoyed the way real mechanics sound when they're being rushed. "Then your radio comes back." The hijacker's eyes flicked down to the paper. He was listening to someone deeper in the cabin. A second voice answered, too quiet to catch, but it carried authority. The door opened wider. Klein stepped closer, hands visible, eyes down. The injured passenger groaned, and that sound hit the ramp like a timer. Caldwell didn't move her lips when she keyed her mic. "Hold, door only, no early hero moves." A quiet copy came back from inside the truck, and while that convoy crept toward the aircraft, here's what you need to know about the stakes. This wasn't just about passengers. The cell wanted a spectacle on camera. They wanted to force the release of a detained financier, yes, but they also wanted a public moment that would recruit, fundraise, and trigger a second wave. If they walked away from Dulles with that win, you wouldn't be counting hostages. You'd be counting copycats. 3 weeks earlier, nobody at the FBI was saying the word plane. It started in Fairfax County, in a parking lot behind a strip of cheap stores where the lights buzz and nobody asks questions. A courier named Farid Qasim stepped out of a dented sedan with a duffel bag slung low, shoulders tight like he expected to get grabbed. He did. Agents hit him fast and controlled, pinned him on wet asphalt, pulled the duffel free. Inside were vacuum-sealed stacks of cash, bundled neat, labeled in careful handwriting, like someone treated money the way other people treat evidence. Farid tried to act stupid until Aaron Caldwell slid his phone across the table in an interview room and turned the screen toward him. There was a folder of files that had no business being on a courier's device. Badge templates, a list of gate codes, photos of airport ground equipment taken from specific angles, and a draft message that hadn't been sent yet, sitting in the queue like a mistake. Work order printed, radios charged, tools in bag, gate change confirmed. Do not say hijack. Farid stared at that last line and his face changed, not into guilt, but into something smaller and older. Learned fear. Caldwell kept her voice even. Who wrote this? Farid swallowed hard. A man who practices, he said. He makes them rehearse how to walk, how to talk, like workers. Name. Farid's lips trembled once. Youssef. That night, analyst Priya Nair ran the file metadata and found the same word tucked into multiple documents like a tag. Sable. Not a location on any airport map. A label the cell used internally. A way to talk about something without saying it. Caldwell didn't sleep. She didn't need to. She had enough to feel the direction of the threat even before she had the full picture. Because when someone prints a fake maintenance work order and tells their people, do not say hijack, they're not fantasizing about violence. They're preparing to blend into a place where violence can happen in silence. The word Sable showed up in those files like a fingerprint. Not in one place, but everywhere. In the file name of a work order, in the header of a checklist, in the corner of a badge template. Whoever built the package wanted a single tag that meant this plan, without ever saying it out loud. Aaron Caldwell pulled the case into the Washington Field Office Joint Terrorism Task Force the same day Farid Qasim stopped shaking. She didn't pitch it as a hijack. Not yet. She pitched it as an access case with a violence endpoint. A planner rehearsing contractor movements was worse than a loud extremist with a manifesto, because the airport would do half the work for him. People on the ramp expect uniforms. They expect clipboards. They expect impatience. They wave it through. Priya Nair started with the boring part that breaks big cases. She printed the badge templates, compared them to real airside credentials, then hunted for the tiny tells. The font spacing, the punch hole placement, the wrong shade of blue in a seal. Whoever made the templates had either seen the real thing up close or had help from someone who did. That pushed her to the payroll side. The gate codes and ramp procedures pointed to one world, subcontractors, the people who touch everything and belong to nobody. 2 days later, Priya found a payment pattern that didn't match a normal life. A man named Daniel Ruckman, shift supervisor for a ground services subcontractor near Dulles, was getting small deposits that always landed on the same day, always just under the amount that would trigger internal questions. Caldwell didn't grab him. Not because she was gentle, but because she wanted the whole chain. If Ruckman felt heat, the door would slam shut, and the planner would vanish into a new plan. So Caldwell did what good cases do first. She watched. Ruckman left work one evening and drove to a self-serve car wash in Sterling. He didn't wash anything. He parked in a far stall and waited like a man meeting a debt. A gray sedan pulled in behind him, window cracked. An arm reached out and dropped an envelope into Ruckman's passenger seat. No handshake, no eye contact. Transaction like breathing. Ruckman opened it immediately. Cash. He didn't smile. He exhaled, as if that envelope had solved a problem he'd been carrying all week. That confirmed the door existed. It didn't prove who owned it. Then a second track broke open, and it wasn't money. It was tools. A shipping label pulled from Fareed's phone led to a small industrial strip in Manassas, the kind with roll-up doors and faded signs. One unit was rented under a shell name that looked like a real vendor. Inside, the team expected to find equipment. They found something stranger. Uniform coveralls, still folded, each with a different company patch stitched on like a costume department had options. Radio headsets in original packaging. A set of high-vis vests with reflective tape cut and re-sewn to match the exact style used on the Dulles ramp. And on a metal table, a stack of printed pages weighted down by a socket wrench. They weren't manifestos. They were scripts. Short lines, written like stage directions. If asked for ID, show work order first. If asked who called, say ops desk. Do not argue. Do not use the word hijack. Caldwell held one page and felt the hair on her neck lift. This wasn't rage. This was discipline. Somebody was training men to speak in a safe, boring rhythm, because boring gets you close. The first complication hit before the team even finished photographing the pages. A vehicle slowed outside the unit. Not a patrol car. A plain SUV that moved too carefully. The driver didn't look at the building. He looked at the reflection in the dark glass of the unit next door, checking for silhouettes without turning his head. An agent inside whispered, "We've got eyes." Caldwell didn't have time to debate. She ordered the team out the back, fast and silent, taking only what mattered. Photos, the scripts, the coverall patches. They didn't get a suspect. They didn't get a face. They got confirmation that the plan was real and someone was watching their tempo. That night, a cooperating airport worker agreed to meet Caldwell in a crowded diner near Herndon. His name was Thomas Delgado. He wasn't brave. He was scared and trying to stay employed. Thomas told Caldwell something small that made everything bigger. He said a ground services supervisor had started asking strange questions the last 2 weeks. Not about flights, about windows. When does the ramp get loud enough that nobody notices a raised voice? When does a gate change get broadcast? How long does it take a tug to reach a hard stand from the service road? Thomas didn't know what Sable meant. He only knew the questions were not normal. He also knew the supervisor asking them was Daniel Ruckman. Priya took that and made a map. Not of ideology, of routine, shift changes, vehicle routes, ramp access points, the places where a uniform becomes an invisibility cloak. The second complication landed the next morning. Ruckman didn't go to work. He called in sick, then drove to a storage facility near Chantilly and sat in his car for 10 minutes without getting out. He made a call. He waited. Then he left. That looked like a warning. Caldwell understood the message. Someone had either felt the Manassas pressure or had eyes on the car wash, or both. The planner was tightening the schedule. The case was sliding toward a crisis scenario, and Caldwell didn't yet know what the crisis would look like. She couldn't wait for a perfect arrest package. She needed a reaction that exposed the next layer, so she ordered a controlled move that would force the schedule into the open. Not a raid, not a headline. A courier grab, quiet and surgical, designed to make the planner touch the board. That decision set the next day in motion. Caldwell chose the courier grab because it looked like a minor crime and felt like a routine day. The goal wasn't a headline arrest. The goal was to force the planner to touch the board and expose what Sable was tied to. The setup was simple on paper. A runner would arrive with an envelope for Daniel Ruckman, thinking it was another payment drop. An undercover agent would take the envelope, walk it 20 feet, and a second team would make the stop. Quiet. Clean. Nobody screaming, nobody running, nobody tipping the bigger machine. The first complication arrived before the runner did. A real service truck rolled into the plaza and parked at the exact corner the surveillance car needed. Two men climbed out arguing about a tire, loud enough to draw eyes, close enough to block the line of sight. That kind of random noise doesn't just ruin camera angles. It forces people to move, and movement is what disciplined surveillance looks for. Caldwell called a micro-adjustment over the radio. Shift left, hold still. Let the truck be the distraction. It would have worked against normal criminals. But Youssef al-Mattar didn't build normal criminals. He built men who looked for mistakes like they were paid to find them. A man in a gray hoodie appeared near the pharmacy entrance, walking like he was killing time. He didn't watch the undercover agent directly. He watched reflections, storefront glass, car windows, the polished side of a vending machine. He used the world like a mirror so he wouldn't have to turn his head. When the undercover agent adjusted his stance, the hoodie man stopped for half a beat, like a musician hearing a wrong note. He lifted his phone and angled it at the glass behind the agent, using the reflection to scan the full scene. Caldwell saw it and didn't hesitate. Abort. The problem with abort is that it still takes time to travel through bodies. The runner arrived anyway. Young, clean sneakers, nervous mouth. He carried a padded electronics case and walked straight toward the undercover agent, as if the route had been rehearsed. He didn't look around. He didn't smile. He didn't hesitate. He handed off the case and started to turn. Then the hoodie man closed distance fast, not running, just arriving too close, too smoothly, like someone stepping into an elevator right behind you. He spoke one sentence in a low voice. "Your vest is wrong." The runner froze. The hoodie man didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need one yet. He reached for the undercover agent's wrist and twisted hard and precise, the kind of control grip that hurts immediately and makes you choose between pain and noise. The padded case slipped and hit the pavement. That was the moment the plaza turned from a controlled nudge into a potential bloodbath. If the takedown team surged, the hoodie man could carve the undercover agent's face open before anyone got hands on him. If they waited, the runner was gone. Caldwell chose the least ugly option. "Back off," she ordered. The team held. The hoodie man released the wrist, leaned in just enough to make the point personal, then walked away at a normal pace. Not sprinting, not panicking. Walking like someone who knew nobody would risk tackling him in public. The runner bolted 3 seconds later. Agents caught him 2 blocks away, but by then the real damage was already done. The cell had been warned, and the schedule had been burned. Back at the office, the undercover agent sat still while a medic cleaned a shallow cut on his wrist where the hoodie man's grip had scraped skin. It wasn't meant to injure. It was meant to leave a mark and teach hesitation. Caldwell didn't talk about feelings. She didn't give speeches. She looked at the runner's phone. The runner had tried to wipe it, but young men who move fast rarely wipe perfectly. Priya recovered a queued message and a short audio clip saved as a draft, never sent. The queued message was a checklist, similar to the one found before, but updated. New hardstand option tow vehicle staged maintenance story only if stopped. Say radio fault, no shouting, the draft audio was worse. It was Yusuf's voice, calm, controlled, speaking to someone who sounded like he was trying not to cry. There was no ideology in it, no preaching, just instruction and punishment. "Say the line again," Yusuf said. The other man repeated the maintenance cover story, but he stumbled on one word. "Wrong," Yusuf replied, still calm. Then a sharp sound, like something hard hitting a table. The man gasped, and you could hear his breathing change. "Again," Yusuf said. Without shaking, the runner didn't know which hardstand. He didn't know which flight. But those two new words mattered. Hardstand option. Tow vehicle staged. That meant the plan wasn't simply to get on a plane. It was to move a plane somewhere isolated and control it there. That required inside timing, and it required equipment that wouldn't look suspicious on an airport ramp. Caldwell didn't chase the hoodie man. She didn't run around the city looking for a single spotter. She did something smarter and colder. She split the case into two operations that would run in parallel. One team would keep pressure on the outside cell, quietly, watching for the next purchase, the next drop, the next rehearsal move. A second team would cut the inside door, not with a raid that would scare everyone, with a targeted approach designed to isolate Daniel Ruckman from his ability to warn anyone. Because if Ruckman stayed active, Yusuf would always know when the Bureau moved. And if Yusuf knew the Bureau moved, the next reaction wouldn't be a courier in a plaza. It would be a cabin full of hostages and a door that only opened on his terms. Caldwell didn't go after Yusuf al-Matar's spotter in the hoodie. That would have been satisfying and useless. The problem wasn't one man in a parking lot. The problem was the door inside Dulles that kept opening for him. So she did something that looks boring from the outside and feels brutal from the inside. She decided to take Daniel Ruckman's access without letting him realize he'd been identified. Priya Nair built the pressure quietly. She pulled every badge scan tied to Ruckman's credentials, then compared it to his scheduled shifts. The pattern wasn't loud, but it was wrong. Too many late-night scans on days he wasn't assigned. Too many entries that lined up with equipment windows, not flights. Like he was walking the ramp to learn timing, not to work. Caldwell brought the airport authority into a closed room, showed them the pattern, and asked for one favor that didn't look like a favor. Put him on a compliance hold. Pull his badge for a routine review. No drama, no warning. If Ruckman believed it was an audit, he'd complain and wait. If he believed it was law enforcement, he'd burn every contact he had before lunch. That same afternoon, Ruckman walked into his supervisor's office and walked out 10 minutes later pale and angry, his badge no longer working. He stood at a staff door and tried it twice, like the second attempt might change reality. Then he did exactly what Caldwell needed him to do. He made a call. Not to his boss, not to HR, to someone saved under a name that wasn't a name. Priya caught the call off tower data and carrier records fast enough that it still felt like one continuous breath. A number that hit twice, went unanswered, then returned a text 3 minutes later. "Hold. New window. Wait for tow." Tow. That word mattered as much as hardstand. Because you don't tow an aircraft as a fantasy. You tow it because you've already planned where it's going to sit when nobody can see it. Caldwell ran a second operation in parallel that night, one designed to put eyes on the equipment without tipping the people. A team parked near a vendor yard outside the airport fence line, where ground support gear cycled in and out. Tugs, carts, power units. Things that look invisible until someone picks the exact right one. Near midnight, a flatbed arrived. 2 men stepped down, both wearing contractor coveralls with a patch that didn't match any vendor operating at Dulles. One carried a clipboard, the other carried a small radio and kept touching his ear like he was listening for instructions. They didn't browse. They went straight to one tug, checked the serial plate, and hooked it like they'd practiced the motion. Then they drove out, slow and calm, like they were on payroll. This is where the case nearly snapped in half. A county patrol car rolled into the yard by coincidence, headlights sweeping across the tug as it moved. The officer didn't light them up. He didn't block the exit. He just sat there, watching. The man with the clipboard waved once, casual, and kept driving. The patrol car stayed still and then followed. Not a pursuit, a tail. Caldwell's team had a choice. Let the patrol car get close enough to see faces, which would force the cell to accelerate, or intervene and risk exposing the FBI surveillance. Caldwell chose a third option. She called the patrol supervisor directly and gave him a short, unpleasant truth. Tell your unit to disengage, now. It's a federal matter. The patrol car peeled away at the next intersection, and the tug disappeared into the dark toward the airport perimeter. They lost the tug, but they gained the most important confirmation so far. Youssef wasn't preparing to get on a plane. He was preparing to move one. The next morning brought the human cost back into the center. Thomas Delgado, the airport worker who'd spoken to Caldwell earlier, didn't show for his shift. His phone went straight to voicemail. When Caldwell sent an agent to check his apartment, the blinds were down and the door chain was still latched from inside. Thomas answered through the crack, without opening the door. His voice was thin. They asked me questions, he said, not the ones they asked before. Caldwell kept her tone calm. Who asked you? Thomas swallowed hard. One of Ruckman's guys. He said the badge review means someone's looking. Then he told me to stay quiet unless I wanted my mother to get a visit. Caldwell didn't argue with him. She didn't tell him to be brave. She gave him a choice that was real. Come with us now, or stay here and hope they're bluffing. Thomas came out with nothing but his keys and a jacket. He couldn't stop shaking. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who had just realized the airport he worked in had become part of someone else's plan. That afternoon, Priya got the piece Caldwell needed to connect everything. A new document hit a printer tied to a subcontractor office near the airfield. A maintenance work order, formatted correctly, routed through the right internal chain, and stamped with the kind of approval that only happens when an inside supervisor nudges it through. The job description was simple. Radio fault, troubleshoot, ground access required. The timing was not simple. It matched a narrow window between pushback and the moment an aircraft would be too committed to the runway flow to easily turn back. A window where confusion could be sold as procedure. Caldwell stared at the printout and didn't blink for a long second. Then she said, "He's not waiting anymore." That night, Daniel Ruckman tried to fix his problem the only way he knew. He drove to his usual car wash stall in Sterling. He waited. No one came. He checked his phone, called again. No answer. He sat there longer than he ever had before, and when he finally left, he didn't drive home. He drove toward the airport. Priya watched his vehicle on a traffic camera feed and felt her stomach drop. He wasn't going to complain. He was going to warn. Caldwell made the call that turned the next day into a countdown. She ordered Ruckman picked up quietly on the road, before he could step back onto airport property, before he could touch a radio, before he could tell Youssef anything else. Because once Youssef knew his inside door was closing, he wouldn't choose another courier drop. He'd choose a stage. Daniel Ruckman was taken off the road before sunrise, 3 cars boxing him in near a cloverleaf in Sterling. No sirens, no shouting, an unmarked sedan eased in front, a second slid behind, and a third pinned his driver's side mirror with headlights until he understood there was nowhere to drift. He rolled down the window halfway, trying to smile like a man who had simply been inconvenienced. Erin Caldwell didn't trade words with him. She showed a badge, said his name once, then gave him a choice that wasn't really a choice. Hands on the wheel. Step out. Slow. Ruckman's eyes kept flicking to his phone on the console like it could save him. When an agent lifted it in an evidence bag, Ruckman's face went slack, and for the first time, he looked less like a hustler and more like a man realizing he'd bet on the wrong side. Priya Nair was already pulling carrier logs. The last text on Ruckman's device wasn't a complaint about his badge audit. It was a short instruction sent hours earlier. New window. Do not call. Wait for tow. Caldwell read it once, then handed the phone back to Priya without a comment. The timing felt wrong, too calm, too final, like the decision had already been made somewhere else. The call came in before anyone could finish the roadside paperwork. An aircraft, domestic departure, Dulles, possible hijack in progress. Not a rumor, not a maybe. A confirmed distress message routed through ATC, then cut off mid-transmission. Caldwell didn't look at the sky. She looked at Ruckman in cuffs and asked one question. Flat. Which flight? Ruckman tried to play stupid for half a second. Then his mouth started trembling. He whispered a number that sounded like he was trying not to say it out loud, like saying it would make it real. Caldwell turned away and moved. No speech, no anger. The case had just stopped being a file and turned into a live scene with civilians inside it. By the time Caldwell reached the airport perimeter, the jet was already off the gate. Not airborne. Not yet. A regional aircraft had been moved to a remote hardstand under a maintenance pretext, exactly the kind that had been sitting in those scripts. Radio fault, troubleshoot, ground access required. The passengers were still on board because the delay had been sold as a quick fix. The crew had been told not to deplane because it would reset the slot. That was the trap. People accept inconvenience when it sounds procedural. 2 men in contractor coveralls had approached with a work order and a tool bag, climbed the stairs like they'd done it 100 times, and stepped inside before anyone thought to question why maintenance needed the cabin. The moment the door shut, the tone changed. A flight attendant tried to push past one of them toward the cockpit. He caught her by the arm and pulled her in so hard her shoulder hit the galley wall. He didn't yell. He didn't rant. He pressed a knife into her ribs through the fabric, just enough to make her gasp. Just enough for the nearest passengers to hear the sound and understand what came next. Then he spoke into the intercom with a calm voice that didn't belong on a plane. Nobody moves. Nobody screams. Sit down. In the cockpit, the captain hit the emergency code, tried to get a transmission out, then went quiet. The hijackers didn't need the aircraft in the air yet. They needed it isolated, controlled, and loud enough to be seen. Caldwell arrived at the command post as the jet settled on the hardstand, far from terminals, far from windows, surrounded by empty pavement and heat shimmer. The airport's emergency vehicles stayed back on purpose, forming a distant line that looked like caution, not aggression. Inside, the hijackers started shaping the cabin. One passenger stood up too quickly, either from panic or instinct. A hijacker shoved him back into the seat and slashed his forearm, shallow but deliberate, the kind of cut that bleeds fast and scares everyone else into stillness. The flight attendant grabbed napkins and pressed them into the wound, whispering to keep him awake. Negotiations began, and Yusuf al-Matar finally made his presence felt without ever showing his face. The voice that answered the negotiator wasn't excited. It wasn't angry. It was controlled, like a man reading instructions he'd rehearsed so many times he no longer needed the paper. Release the financier. Deliver him to the airport. And I want a camera. Caldwell heard the demand and didn't flinch, but her eyes shifted toward Priya. The financier's name was on the board already. A detention case the Bureau had used as leverage. A man tied to the same money channels that had paid Ruckman. The hijack wasn't random rage. It was a forced trade, wrapped in spectacle. Priya leaned in and spoke quietly. He's trying to turn this into proof. If he walks away, every small cell that's been watching learns the same lesson. Caldwell understood. This wasn't just a hostage crisis. It was a recruitment ad being built in real time. Then another complication hit. A ground controller reported the aircraft's auxiliary systems had powered up. Not a full engine start, but a step toward it. The hijackers were testing whether they could make the jet move again. If the wheels rolled, the perimeter would widen and the decision window would shrink to seconds. Mark Rivas arrived with the HRT element and didn't waste breath. Traditional breach gets people cut, he said. They'll start killing the moment they see rifles. Caldwell answered, Then they don't see rifles. She looked at the hard stand through binoculars and saw the thing that made her stomach tighten. The forward door opened a few inches, closed again, opened again. The hijackers were peeking out, checking response posture, hunting for the moment they could claim the authorities escalated and justify violence. Caldwell asked the negotiator for one more request, something that sounded harmless. Ask them what they need to fix the radio fault. Get them to say it. The negotiator did. The reply came back almost immediately. Send mechanics, tools, tow if needed. No armed men. It was the first time the hijackers gave permission for anyone to approach, and it was permission wrapped in their own cover story. Caldwell turned to Rivas. If the only allowed approach is maintenance, then maintenance is what they get. Rivas didn't smile. He nodded once, already understanding the shape of the plan. A maintenance truck was requisitioned, ground equipment staged, coveralls and vests pulled from a kit that had been waiting for a scenario that nobody wanted to name. On the hard stand, the cabin door cracked open again, and the hijacker's knife flashed for a fraction of a second in the gap, as if to remind everyone that a disguise only works until it doesn't. The maintenance truck stopped at a distance that looked respectful, not tactical. The tug and tool cart rolled behind it like routine, and routine was the only thing keeping the knives inside that cabin from turning into account. Erin Caldwell watched the hard stand through binoculars and forced herself to blink slowly. The hijackers had given one rule that mattered more than anything else: no armed men. So the approach had to look unarmed, sound unarmed, and move unarmed, even though the people inside those coveralls were built for one thing. Nate Klein adjusted his hard hat and stepped down from the truck with a clipboard in one hand and the tool bag in the other. Two more mechanics followed, carrying a cable case and a small diagnostic box that looked harmless if you didn't know what it was for. Their vests were scuffed. Their boots had real grime. Their posture was bored and slightly irritated, like they'd been pulled away from lunch. That attitude mattered. Fear looked suspicious on a ramp. The forward door opened a few inches. The same face appeared. The knife stayed just out of view, but the blade flashed once as he moved, a reminder. Paper, the hijacker said. Klein held the work order up first, not his badge. The paper was the language the hijackers wanted to believe. The man's eyes scanned it too fast, like he was reading for errors, not meaning. "You touch radio," the hijacker said. "You fix, no tricks." Klein nodded once. "We'll check the panel and the rack," he said, flat. "If it's a fault, it's quick. If it's wiring, you'll be waiting." The hijacker's gaze flicked to the tool bag. Open. This was the moment disguises die. The moment someone decides to test the weight of your lie. Klein set the bag down, unzipped it, and spread the top just enough to show the first layer. Wrenches, tape, a flashlight, a bundle of disposable gloves, a rag. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that screamed weapon. The heavy part stayed buried where it looked like the kind of dense equipment mechanics curse under their breath. The hijacker leaned out farther, eyes narrowing. Behind Klein, one of the other mechanics muttered, annoyed on purpose. "Can we do the job or not? I got another call after this." It worked, not because it was clever, but because it sounded real. People who are about to storm a plane don't complain about scheduling. The door opened wider. Inside, the cabin smelled like recycled air and sweat, and a thin metallic edge that didn't belong on a passenger flight. Caldwell saw it through the binoculars from a distance. Passengers staring straight ahead, hands still, faces locked in a quiet panic. The flight attendant with the knife at her ribs was trying not to shake. A man in the middle rows was slumped, bleeding through layers of napkin and fabric. The hijacker pointed the knife toward the front. "Cockpit." Klein started up the stairs, slow, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was used to squeezing through tight spaces. The other two followed with the cable case and the diagnostic box. Halfway up, a second hijacker appeared from deeper in the cabin. Younger, harsher eyes, wired with adrenaline. He stepped into the aisle and stared at Klein's hands. "You're too calm," he said. Klein didn't look up. "I fix radios for people who scream at me all day," he said. "Calm is cheaper than arguing." For a second, it looked like the younger hijacker might do something stupid just to prove he could. Then a third voice came from behind the cockpit door, low and controlled, the voice that had been shaping this whole day. "Let them work," it said. "If they lie, they die." Yusef al-Matar stayed out of sight, but his control filled the cabin like pressure. Klein reached the forward panel, knelt, and opened it with movements that looked practiced, because they were. Not rehearsed for hijacking, rehearsed for not looking like someone rehearsing. He spoke just enough to sell the job, not enough to invite conversation. "Power's up," he said. "Give me a minute." The injured passenger made a wet sound and tried to sit up. The flight attendant pushed him gently back down, eyes glossy, whispering for him to stay still. Outside, Caldwell keyed the negotiator. "Give them the distraction now." The negotiator's voice boomed through the loudspeaker, addressing the hijackers by name the FBI didn't actually have. But the hijackers didn't know that. "You've got one chance to send the injured passenger out. This ends with you in prison, not as martyrs." The younger hijacker snapped his head toward the window, anger flaring. He stepped away from the aisle to shout back, and in that half-second the cabin geometry changed. Klein didn't move like a sprinter. He moved like a switch flipping. The tool bag came open fully, fast, and the heavy inside became purpose. Bodies surged forward in a tight line, controlled violence in a narrow space. One hijacker tried to yank the flight attendant into him as a shield. She screamed, and the sound was the most honest thing that had happened all day. The next moments were ugly and fast. A blade slashed outward, catching Klein's forearm through the coverall sleeve. Not deep, but enough to burn. Klein didn't flinch. He drove forward and pinned the knife hand to the galley wall. Another mechanic took the second hijacker low, knocking his knees out so the blade couldn't swing wide. The third moved toward the cockpit door, not to play hero, but to stop the worst outcome. Inside, passengers folded inward, ducking, crying, some frozen so hard they didn't even move when told to. Yusef finally showed himself. He stepped out from behind the cockpit door with a pistol held close to his body, muzzle down, eyes scanning for the first person to make a mistake. He saw the coveralls, and for a split second he believed the lie, because he wanted to believe it. Then he saw the way they moved. That realization hit his face like a punch. He raised the pistol, but he didn't get a clean line. Too many bodies, too much chaos, too many angles that weren't there a second ago. A hijacker near the rear of the forward cabin did something desperate. He reached into a pocket and pulled out a taped bundle with wires protruding, shaking it like a threat, trying to buy space with fear. Nobody in the cabin negotiated with it. The distance closed, the bundle dropped, and the man went down before he could make it into anything more than a last bad idea. The cockpit door stayed shut. That mattered. If the door opened, the whole aircraft became a different problem. Klein heard Caldwell in his earpiece, calm through the noise. "Get the aisle, start the flow." The extraction was not elegant. It was a human spill. Passengers were guided, pushed, hauled, some tripping down the stairs, some collapsing onto the hardstand the moment their feet hit open air. The bleeding man was carried out by two agents, his head rolling limply until he coughed and proved he was still present. The flight attendant stumbled down last, hands shaking so hard she couldn't hold the railing. She kept repeating one sentence under her breath like a prayer. "I did what he said. I did what he said." Inside the cabin, Yusuf tried one final move when he realized the script had failed. He grabbed for a passenger near the front, a young man who had been frozen in place, and pulled him close, pistol tight to the ribs, using him the way he used everyone. But the moment he did it, he gave up the one thing he needed: distance. He was taken alive not by mercy, but by geometry. Hands crashed into him, the pistol was stripped, and he hit the cabin floor hard enough to knock the air out of his lungs. Zip ties bit into his wrists. His cheek pressed into the carpet, and he stared forward with the first real emotion anyone had seen on him all day. Not rage, shock. Outside, Caldwell watched the last passengers clear and didn't let herself breathe until the cabin door was secured from the outside, and the words came through her radio. "Aircraft control regained. Primary in custody." The hardstand stayed loud with sirens and shouting, but one problem remained. The people who sold the access were still out there, and if they ran now, the next plan would be harder to see. The hardstand looked like a crime scene and an emergency room at the same time. Passengers sat on the pavement in loose clusters, some crying, some staring, some laughing in that broken way people laugh when their body doesn't know what else to do. Medics worked on the bleeding man by the stairs, cutting his sleeve, talking to him like his name mattered more than the wound. Yusef al-Matar was on the ground near the maintenance truck, wrists cinched tight, cheek pressed into concrete. He kept trying to lift his head to see the plane, like he couldn't accept that his stage had been taken away from him. Erin Caldwell didn't celebrate. She didn't even look relieved. She walked past the jet, past the passengers, and stopped at the evidence table where Daniel Ruckman's phone had been placed hours earlier. Priya Nair was already there, gloves on, eyes hard. "They weren't improvising," Priya said. They were following a package. Caldwell nodded once. "Show me." Priya slid a screen toward her. It wasn't a manifesto. It was an operations list, tagged with the same single word that kept appearing like a shadow. Sable. Under it were files with dates, gate numbers, tow requests, and one line that made Caldwell's stomach tighten. Second wave if trade fails. This was the macro stake the hijackers never said out loud. The plane wasn't the end. It was a trigger. Caldwell turned and looked at Yusuf. "He lives," she said quietly, like it was a decision and a warning at the same time. "If he dies on the cabin floor, this second wave goes dark." Yusuf's eyes flicked up. He didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He just watched her the way planners watch people who might ruin their math. Priya leaned closer. Ruckman wasn't the only door. That was the real twist of the case. Ruckman sold access, but he wasn't the one who made the fake maintenance work order look legitimate inside airport systems. Someone had pushed it through from a higher seat, someone who could make paper become permission. Priya pulled up a chain of approvals tied to the work order that had moved the aircraft to the hardstand. One name sat at the top, clean and ordinary. Elliot Pierce, contractor ops coordinator. Not an airport executive. Not a high-profile figure, the kind of person nobody notices because they sit behind routine. And routine is where airports hide their vulnerabilities. Caldwell didn't wait for a long briefing. She called the second team that had been staged for exactly this moment, because the Bureau knew the aftermath would be the best cover they'd ever get. While the airport focused on the hijacked plane, Pierce would assume law enforcement was too busy to notice him. That assumption lasted less than an hour. Agents found Pierce in a small office suite outside the airfield, a place filled with clipboards, scheduling boards, and the hum of printers. He tried to play confused for the first 10 seconds, then tried to turn angry, then tried to negotiate. Caldwell didn't let him pick a role. She put one photo on his desk, a still from the hardstand camera of the mechanics walking toward the aircraft. Then she put a second photo down, Pierce at a coffee shop 2 weeks earlier, handing an envelope to a man in contractor coveralls. Pierce's face drained. His mouth opened and shut once, like he wanted to deny it, but couldn't find a version that fit the evidence. Priya's team imaged his devices on the spot. What they found wasn't just proof of this hijack. It was a menu. More work orders, more equipment windows, notes about which gates had blind spots, and a short video file labeled for upload, filmed vertically, pre-written captions included. Ready to become propaganda the second Yusuf got what he wanted. That's why Caldwell needed Yusuf alive, not for a headline, for keys, for the next names, for the locations that weren't on Pierce's laptop, because some planners don't trust paper. Back on the ramp, Yusuf was lifted onto his knees and walked toward an unmarked vehicle. He looked over his shoulder once at the aircraft, like he was watching his own plan being dismantled piece by piece. He didn't speak until he was at the door. Then he said one sentence. Quiet. "You used my mask." Caldwell answered him without raising her voice. "You handed it to us." In the end, that was the core of the case. The hijack wasn't just violence. It was access disguised as routine, bought from people who told themselves it was only paperwork. And the reason the assault had to look like mechanics was simple. The cell had trained the cabin to expect maintenance, so the FBI turned that expectation into the only door that opened. If you want more cases like this, subscribe and hit like. And tell me in the comments, as simply as possible, do you think the mechanic disguise was the right call, or should they have gone in openly from the start?